And so we're so pleased tonight and honored to have Dr. Lyla June Johnston for our Conversations program for the month of June. And Joe, I was wondering if you could possibly introduce Dr. Johnston.
Certainly, I'd be honored to. Okay. I first met Lyla June, what must have been accidentally. Oops. Here. I first met Lyla June by accident, I think. We were flying to the Assisi conference. I forget whether it was 2017 or 2018, and she happened to be sitting in the seat behind me on the airplane. And I didn't know at that time where she was going, but I could just tell she was an impressive personality. There was an aura that radiated from her. I've been urging Jim, and as have others, to invite Lyla June to speak. Many of you who were at the Assisi conference will remember her, but I'll just read a little bit about her bio that she sent to us first. Lyla June is an Indigenous musician, scholar, and community organizer of Diné, or Navajo, and Cheyenne, as well as European lineages. Her message focuses on Indigenous rights, supporting youth, traditional land stewardship practices, and healing intergenerational and intercultural trauma. She blends her study of human ecology, which she did at Stanford University, with graduate work in Indigenous pedagogy, and the traditional worldview she grew up with to inform her music, perspectives, and solutions. Her doctoral research, which I'll speak about in a moment, focused on the ways in which pre-colonial Indigenous nations shaped large regions of Turtle Island, where we live, to produce abundant food systems for humans and non-humans together. Lyla's doctoral dissertation is available online through her website, lylajune.com, and its title is Indigenous Regenerative Food and Land Management Systems and the Excavation of Human History. I remember long before I met Lyla June, constantly hearing that wherever the human presence is, the ecological vibrancy of the environment is diminished by the humans. However, as Lyla June documents, and as others have pointed out, wherever the Native Americans went, the land and the animals flourished more. So it's not the human is not inherently contradictory to nature. Certain humans coming from Europe and elsewhere were contradictory to nature, but the indigenous practices are something we now need to return to. Also, I don't know, Lyla June may say something tonight about a dream that she wrote about her grandparents on her indigenous side meeting with her indigenous grandparents on her European side. I've of Irish ancestry, and the English colonizers looked upon the Irish as very similar to the Native Americans. As a matter of fact, the Times of London wrote one time in the 1600s that soon a native Celt in Ireland would be as rare, as they said, a red man on the banks of the Hudson. They began their campaign against indigenous peoples first in Ireland and also in Scotland. But so they had pioneered the practices first in Europe, the English and other Europeans. And of course, Julius Caesar is notorious for wiping out the entire Celtic tradition in terms of its cultures in his four famous Gallic Wars, about which he wrote a book. And he massacred hundreds of thousands of indigenous peoples, and he sold into slavery close to 100,000 people, women and children especially. And that's how he became rich and how he became eventually the Roman emperor. So this is an old story that goes way back. Thomas Berry wrote of 4 eras in the human journey. I speak of them in the in abbreviated version. I call it the primal, the classical, the modern, and postmodern, but using postmodern in a different sense, meaning ecological, meaning after the modern. Tom doesn't say this, but it's implicit in what he wrote, and I think we all should take it as foundational. These stages are not like we're getting a new car every 3 years or something and getting rid of the old. I see them as concentric circles that one builds on the other, almost like a spiral. But the indigenous traditions, many people would argue, Tom would, I know, and I would, remain foundational for the entire human experience. And the terrible thing of the modern world is we've been cut off from our indigenous roots, and naturally we've been cut off from nature. You have to relink with both. And Lyla June will tell us about that tonight. I can't tell you how excited I am to have her here. I've been dreaming that she would come and speak to us for a long, long time, and I don't want to take up any more of her most valuable time. Welcome, Lyla June.
Oh, that's so kind of you. It's really good to see you, Joe. Yeah, I really appreciate your introduction. I thought it was I loved how you added your perspective on it as well, because sometimes I'm always talking alone. So it's nice to be talking alongside you about the same topic. So yeah, I have a number of things I could present on and I could talk about. I definitely want to hear in the chat from you guys if there's one thing you were wanting to leave this conversation with. Like, feel free to plug it in the chat, because I'm very adaptable and I'm very extemporaneous. Let me make sure you guys, yeah, you guys can hear me pretty well. Yeah, okay, I'm using my thing. Okay, so I guess the first thing I want to do is introduce myself properly. And maybe while I'm doing that, you can plug in the chat. My question is, what is one question you have for me, or one thing you'd like to walk away from this this Zoom call with? And I know we got started a little late, but you know, that happens, so no worries, Jim. So yeah, Lyla June Ado nanisht educachi nshle tsitsis bashishin ashin hidoshichedo bilagane doshinale Gallup, New Mexico Shiran Ado Akut Ego Dene Astanishle. So my name is Lyla June and I come from the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan of the Dene Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo. And I get that clan from my mother, because we are a matrilineal people. And we get our last names from our mothers traditionally, not our fathers. So that's sort of like part of my identity is being a matrilineal person from a matrilineal society. But I also mentioned my other clans. The second clan you mentioned is your father's mother, which in my case is Southern Cheyenne. She was from Anadarko, Oklahoma. And then my third clan I mentioned is my mother's father. That would be the Salt clan of the Dene. And my last clan is the Scottish clans, my father's father. So I'm Johnston with the T, mind you, is a Scottish last name. I'm just moving this box of dog biscuits because it keeps like being like, hi, I'm here. Like it's like piercing through the Zoom thing. And now my video is a little blurry. Let me just reset it real quick. Okay, there we go. So yeah, and the Scottish name Johnston actually comes from Annandale, which was part of the resistance. It was one of the holdouts and the strongholds of Scottish resistance to the British Crown when they came in and did horrific things to the Scottish people, including boarding schools where people were sent for basically proper English education, including language prohibition of the Scottish languages, including if you were caught speaking Scottish, you would get either a goat skull or some other thing attached to around your neck, and the only way to get it off of your neck is if you caught another kid speaking Scottish language dialect. So that's how they tried to, and same with Welsh. You know, the Welsh and the Irish went through the same thing. The Welsh, if you were caught speaking Welsh in school, they'd put a block of wood around your neck that said WN, which stood for Welsh not. and you could only get it off your neck if you caught another kid speaking Welsh. So also when the British went into Scotland, it is said that they would kill the bards first, who were the storytellers and the musicians and the people who would hold the stories and the culture. And they would kill them first, and they would bury them face down so their stories would die with them. Similarly with the Irish, the harpists were targets. The Irish had an incredible school of harpistry, if you will. I'm not sure if that's a real word, but the harpists were just fabulous. And Joe, you might mute. You're still unmuted, just so you know. No problem. And the harpists were on a caliber, I think, than we might not understand today. They were absolutely incredible by all accounts, almost heavenly in their abilities to work with the harps, and they passed this down to their children. And a lot of that tradition was eroded because in the year 1240 something, King Edward I ordered the hanging of 100 harpists. And at one point, Queen Elizabeth I ordered that every Celtic harpist be hung. And so this was part of their persecution of the Celtic culture and the Celtic wisdom that is embedded in the culture. And so for a long time, I think people have known, and by people, I mean those who seek conquest, have known that if you can take away a person's culture, as in their language, their songs, their orientation to the world, their compass, their alphabet, you can disorient them in a way that makes it much easier to control them, to subdue them, to exploit them, and to oppress them. So speaking of alphabets, the Irish alphabet comes all from trees. So every tree has a name, and the word for A would come from a tree that started with an A, etc. So even their alphabet is ecologically based, because the Welsh and the Celtic and the Scottish people and their neighbors all the way into France and beyond were of Druidic cultures that were deeply ecological, deeply based and rooted in taking care of the land, specifically the oak groves, which were once an extremely important part of what we now call the British Isles. Excuse me. And those oaks are now largely, unfortunately, gone. If you go to Britain these days, it's pretty denuded of trees, unfortunately. And but there are some places where the British did not manage to destroy the trees. And of course, the British themselves were sort of a result of trauma as well. So even though they did extremely evil and horrific things, I don't actually judge them or blame them, because they themselves were children of war, children of extreme abuse and oppression and torture, really. So all of this is to say that all of us have roots in places that we might not always remember, or we might not always think about, or we might not always honor. Because for myself, growing up as an Indigenous woman on my mom's side and partly on my dad's side, I was always taught to stay quiet about my whiteness. I was always taught to, I mean, I grew up in New Mexico, Taos, New Mexico, which is very brown, very Indigenous centric. Everyone celebrates Native culture there. People go there just to like see real Native Americans and stuff. And so I had a special context in which I grew up. But in this place, it was very much about hiding your white identity, because your white identity was responsible for slavery and genocide and the Dawes Act and the Sand Creek Massacre, and you could go on and on. But what my father, who was mostly white and frankly hated being white, what he didn't really understand and therefore could never teach me is that what we call white people weren't just born in a state where they wanted to conquer people. They weren't just naturally, randomly born in a state where they were oppressing people and abusing people and torturing people. I would strongly argue that without a shadow of a doubt, we were conditioned after 2,000 years of warfare, famine, disease, torture, to become people who were not rooted in love, rooted in peace, rooted in matriarchy, rooted in something that celebrates differences rather than fears them. Rooted in, now we became rooted in fear. And that, again, that takes many thousands of years of torture for you to turn the innately good human being into a weapon. It takes a long time to fashion something as gorgeous and beautiful as a human being into something that hates, into something that hurts. And so I think the level of pain that we as white people, I say white because the word white also kind of erases the more nuanced lineages that we may have, and that I think we should all be researching and understanding and celebrating ultimately. That we as white people, the amount of damage we have created, I think, is directly proportional to the amount of trauma we have experienced. In other words, hurt people, and as my friend Dr. Phil Lane likes to say, colonized people colonize people. So I think it's really important to consider these things, because it's really important to love ourselves, frankly. And it's really important to love ourselves because if we don't, it can cause all kinds of illness, both of the spirit and the mind and the body. And we must, but in order to love ourselves, we kind of need some good evidence of why we should love ourselves, right? Like, humans are very self-deprecating. They're very, have such a guilty conscience. It's so easy for us to slip into self-hatred or disappointment. And so, like, it's really hard to convince a human that they are beautiful and they are lovable sometimes. And it's really hard to really, really convince them that it is okay to love yourself. So what I did was I started to research, who were we before the conquest, or the attempted conquest, I should say, of the Roman expansion, of the Inquisition, of the British invasions, of the Celtic cultures, of all manner of warfare. I even just Wikipedia'd how many wars have there been in Spain, what we now call Spain. And even within the past few hundred, or up to like the past millennium, they had 28 documented periods of severe bloodshed in Spain. 28. That's a lot of war, And so one part of loving ourselves, I think, is honoring the amount of trauma we've sustained as white people. The other thing I think that we have to honor is who we really are. So there's a couple of data points that I think really give us something to hold on to that's real. That's like, okay, yes, we were Earth people. We were female centric and appreciating women, the feminine. We were sustainable. We were strikingly similar to every other indigenous culture on the planet, in many different ways. So one of the data points that I like to share is that in 2009, they found one of the Venus figurines, these little clay figurines in German soil. They found it in Germany. And we find these throughout what we now call Europe. And this figurine was molded into the shape of a woman. And they radiocarbon dated this figurine, and it was 40,000 years old. I mean, this is how long our European ancestors have been molding the earth into the shape of a woman and honoring the feminine and honoring the earth. So I like to bring that up to be like, hey, we've been here a long time, just like indigenous peoples in the Americas have been here way longer than anyone wants to give us credit for. Our elders say hundreds of thousands of years, and now science is starting actually to back that up, believe it or not. Right now they're giving us 25,000 years. That's the furthest back they'll go, because they have to go that far back because there's all this evidence. But it's gonna keep going back, mark my words. We were here way before the Bering Strait, opened up, the land bridge. So there's all kinds of fascinating, cool things that are basically proving Native Americans have been here way longer than anyone wants to admit. And same is true for Europe. I mean, 40,000 years, and that's not even that long ago in our evolutionary history. Another data point I like to talk about is the 17,000-year-old cave paintings in France. I was honored enough or blessed enough to go into the caves in France to look at the cave paintings and to see the beautiful, beautiful signatures of our ancestors. And there was paintings of ibex, there was paintings of bison, and there were paintings of horses, and there were paintings of pregnant women. And these were not some like crummy paintings. These were gorgeous. And my little friend was with me. He was about 8 years old, 9 years old. He said, Lyla, if these people were so stupid, how come they can draw better than us? And I was like, fair point, fair point. I mean, it was just absolutely stunning. It was like the Mona Lisa of a bison. And there are still bison in Europe, in Germany, the Black Forest. There were always bison in Europe. So anyways, this is how long our European ancestors have been honoring the earth, honoring animals, that they would go miles into a cave just to paint an ode to the animals that they saw as sacred. Another data point I like to talk about is, like I said, the alphabet of the Irish folks. And there's many more data points that frankly I don't even know about. Because although I do have a PhD in native food systems and indigenous food systems and land management practices, I don't have a full PhD in indigenous European cultures. But that would be a really fun one that maybe multiple people should do together to have different perspectives on it. But anyways, there is one thing I do know, though, that is very beautiful about Norway, southern Norway. This group of scientists analyzed 68 ponds in the area, and they found that there was fossilized charcoal deposits, layers in the soil cores of these ponds that dated back for 10,000 years, and that these charcoal deposits were much more frequent than natural fires could have produced. And they were much more gentle than a catastrophic fire. They were small fires. And so basically they interpret this to show that ancient, I don't know how, it depends on what scale you're talking about, but Mesolithic era, meaning thousands of years ago, Norwegian ancestors were routinely and regeneratively doing prescribed burns in the area of all of southern Norway. And that's only the ponds that we've analyzed. I would bet you $1,000 that the same is true for other ponds if we analyze them in the rest of Europe. And these controlled burns are also what Native Americans did and still do in some places here in the United States, which help to cycle the nutrients of a system. They help to keep the trees spaced apart, and they help to keep the grasslands vibrant for herbivores. And perhaps most relevant to many of us, the way we think about it, is they prevent catastrophic fires. When you don't burn for a century or two, which is what has happened in the US, you have a very overgrown forest with lots of sticks and branches and leaves and shrubs, and they're all competing for limited water in the water table. So you have hundreds of trees per acre growing tall and skinny, fighting each other for the canopy, sucking up all the water, and that is a tinderbox waiting to catch on fire. So it's not just climate change that's creating these catastrophic fires. It is also the prohibition of indigenous fires that once were so prevalent from coast to coast to manage the forests and the grasslands and the meadows, and therefore helped to manage herbivore populations, which depended on these meadows for forage. When you don't burn, those meadows collapse into dense thickets of forest that have way too many ticks, not easy to travel in, all kinds of issues when you do that. So Norwegians were doing the same thing thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So there's obviously a lot more I could say, but my main point is that we as European people, we ought to take the time to grieve what has happened to us, and to cry, and to give ourselves permission to do that, and to feel, and to understand and to reckon with how much we have been hit and how much we have been through unspeakably insane periods of time. I'm talking women burned alive at the stake. I'm talking torture chambers. I'm talking public disembowelments. I'm talking crazy stuff. And to honor the fact that we survived it, although a third of Europe did perish with the Black Death, a third of Europe died overnight. And I think when we feel that and we understand that and we forgive that, which is a crazy idea for most people, and I don't blame them. Forgiving that. Forgiveness means we're letting it go. We're letting go the pain of our oppressors. We're not holding it against them. Then we break the cycles and we cease to do these things to other people around the world, which we have, frankly. And so when you are a cycle breaker, you honor that you had been through some challenging times and you are accidentally perpetuating those things to others. And so I personally think that we as quote unquote white people not only have to take accountability for our actions, but we have to take space to grieve what was done to us. And I know a lot of people would whatever, maybe poo-poo on that, but it's okay because we can do it in safe places and we can give ourselves permission to do that in the comfort and the privacy of our hearts to heal. And when we heal, our ancestors heal. And when we heal, our descendants heal. And when we heal, all things heal. And so I'm really a proponent for healing, for forgiving, for self-loving, for self-exploration, self-examination, understanding that Europe as we know it had many different names besides Europe, long before the word Europe was ever coined. And to really honor that we got caught up in some cycles of trauma, and to pledge to work hard to cease perpetuating those cycles in whatever ways we can. To stand up for people of color, to leverage our privilege to help people of color, to apologize bravely and radically, and to apologize with self-love, because you can do both at the same time. You can love yourself deeply and fully and apologize for your mistakes at the same time. And that's the sweet spot I think we're all being asked to do, no matter what race we are. To love ourselves and be accountable at the very same time. And to show up in these times for the healing of the world. Because just because we're children of war does not mean we can't be people of peace today. And I believe that's what we're all being called to do. And I believe we absolutely have the power to do it. So I could go on and on, but I think I will open it up for comments, questions. I haven't even talked about the native land management stuff, which is super fun. And I can give you some links to watch later if you like, because I blab about that all the time in various contexts. And maybe you have a question that has nothing to do with Indigenous European identity, you know. And also, I apologize for centering whiteness so much in this call. I realized that was probably a bad idea because there's not only white folks here. But I think part of my way of leveraging my white privilege is speaking to my white brothers and sisters about this so that we can heal. And so that's maybe why I centered that so much. But it impacts everyone. Because I feel like just like Europe exported French wine, we also exported our trauma to the whole world in very terrible ways. And so the healing of this place and this land and this people, in my eyes, equates the healing of all people. Yeah. All right, we have one question here. And I always feel awkward answering questions like these as if I know the answer better than anyone else, but you guys are all welcome to answer it with me if you want, because I think I very much have like a Freirean take on education, that I'm not speaking to a bunch of blank canvases. I'm speaking to people with knowledge and wisdom who are coming to the table here and have so much to say too. So feel free to answer this with me if you have any ideas. But I would say that the most important message in today's time is love. Maybe that's an anticlimactic answer, but it is, I mean, but what is love? I mean, love is caring for those around us. Love, the sister of love is courage, because you can't properly love someone without standing up to be there for them. And the brother of love is truth. I mean, you have to speak truth. We can't keep pretending and living in these illusions anymore. And connected to love also is faith. I mean, faith is the opposite of fear, right? Trusting. And so we cannot love if we are in fear. And a way to get out of fear is to have more faith. And surrender. Yeah, I love your question, Joe. Actually, I meant to get to that. But yeah, I would say love is the most important message in today's time. And I think that we cannot control the weather we find ourselves in, but we can absolutely control the level of grace, courage, and steadfastness with which we meet that weather. And we are in some intense weather right now. We're in a very challenging time. Convergence of crises, military, technological, climatic, financial, political. you name it, we're living in extraordinary times. And I don't think we're being asked to perfectly and most gracefully handle this as a species, but I think we're just being asked to try, to show up and to try. And the way I think we try is we love, whether it's offering someone who doesn't have air conditioner refuge in your house with global warming, or it's opening up a food bank, or it's showing up to a peaceful protest, or it's loving your neighbors around you. Just the more love we can give right now, the better. And praying to love, asking it to use us as instruments. I think that's always a fun prayer, because it always takes you up on it. It always takes you up on it. Okay, Molly, I'm gonna have you ask first, and then I'm gonna get to Joe's question.
Thank you, Lyla. I wanted to say, I think that the first essay and the first way that I heard that white people were included in the history of trauma was from your essay, was probably 15, maybe 10, 15 years ago, after I took the Wide Awake course. And I'm wondering if I have found the word atonement to be a really strong one. And it seems that within the atonement, the first thing is to see the moral injury that one has perpetrated, that we have perpetrated. And I can assure you that I know in my lineage details of exactly what my ancestors did, specifically in California and the West. But there is a moral injury that I think I realized that we white people feel. And it is heartbreaking. It's grievously heartbreaking. And so often it's not, and this just might be my world of not acceptable, that we would have as much grief about what has been done in our names with the accountability, and that the grief, is fragile in some way, rather than a deeply felt horror of what has been the history of us as human beings. So I don't know, can you help me with how that dilemma is about white people not necessarily being able to be accepted as grieving their history?
Can you encapsulate your question one more time? Sorry.
Sure. How might you comment on the grief that white people can feel because the moral injury that they perpetrated and the moral injury that they feel having done that in their lineage?
Got you. So how to process that grief?
And how to deal with it in the world that does not seem to be acceptable. That our grief is not accepted.
Ah, got you.
Yeah.
Well, it's a common thing. I mean, after World War II, the Soviets moved into Germany and systematically raped German women. But because Germany was the bad guy in World War II, they never really got to grieve that part of the war. So you have to kind of zoom out and have compassion for yourself and for each other. And even if the rest of the world doesn't accept us grieving, for example, the German women, who an extremely high percentage of them were raped by Soviet soldiers, which is horrific, right?
Right.
That even if the world doesn't give them permission to grieve, we have to give ourselves permission to grieve. Because even by the world's own objectives, if we don't grieve, we won't be healthy to be contributing members of society.
Mm.
And so ironically, the world contradicts itself when it says, oh, you're a bad person, you don't get to grieve.
Right.
Because I want peace and I want harmony in my world. But it's like, actually, if you want peace and harmony in your world, you need to help these people grieve. You know? Like, yeah, I had a very, very sick caregiver when I was younger. The person who raised me, one of the people who raised me, very ill, abused me thoroughly. And I think he needed more support than most of us. And I would have loved for him to grieve, and I would have loved for him to heal, because then all of us would have been better for it as well.
Mm.
So I think sometimes you just have to give yourself permission if the rest of the world doesn't understand how to give you permission yet. But also know, if the world did understand, they probably would give you permission. We're all still learning how to do this whole loving each other thing. But yeah, and then the amount of grief one feels for what you've perpetrated, I mean, that one's a toughie. I mean, in my healing process, which involved a lot of abuse, a lot, from the day I was born, really. The hardest part of my healing journey wasn't really healing from what had been done to me, but was loving myself through what I did to others as a result of that.
Mm.
That was hard. Because I had been drugged since I was a kid. I had been abused since I was a kid in many different ways. And as a teenager and a crazy kid in college, I also abused people because I didn't know anything else. And that was the hardest part to face, was the ways I had harmed others. It was really hard, frankly. And but I just kept looking at it. I kept coming back to the table again and again, even though it was hard. I'd be like, okay, well, how can I make sense of this time? And little by little, I managed to make sense of it. And I'm doing a lot better now in every way. But again, love is the only way we're going to get through this. and prayer, asking for Creator's help. Because when you do something that's too hard for you to do, Creator is the one who makes it possible. We don't have to do it alone, in other words, thank God. Okay, let's get to Joe's. Thank you for your question. I'm going to run through these kind of quickly if I can, because I know I have 6 minutes. So since we all came from Indigenous root, what changed us into Romans English oppressors? So what my elders would say is that coyote spirit is very real. Coyote has many different names in many different cultures, but it is a spiritual being. It is a created being like all of us. And it has a deep desire to play God. And it was given many different gifts to protect Earth. But at some point, it turned on Earth and is using those gifts to exploit and oppress Earth. And it's angry at the Creator. And so this spiritual force has no power. And that's why we call it coyote, because it's just like a little coyote likes to hide. It's very thin. It has no power, but it's really tricky. Right? It tricks you. It's kind of clever in that way. But once you learn the tricks, you're pretty much unstoppable. And the biggest trick, of course, is it's always trying to get us to hate ourselves. Because the moment we hate ourselves is the moment we tell Creator, no, don't help me, I'm not worthy. So you lose your father or your mother, whatever you want to call it, the day you start hating yourself. Because even though that father and mother really wants to help you, your self-hatred is essentially a withdrawal of consent for them to help you. And because Creator is so kind and only listens to our free will, even that he can't trespass. If we say, no, I don't want you to help me, I'm not worthy. Even that Creator cannot trespass. So coyote works through a few tricks that it uses over and over and over. One is war. That war makes it really hard for populations of human beings to stand back up. It causes generational issues. One is rape, frankly, sorry for the strong language, but that is also a trick. It gets the woman to hate herself, even though she's done nothing wrong. Rape actually has no power, zero power, because we are not our body, we are our spirit. So it can hurt our body, but like the body reproduces new cells every few months. It's the body comes and goes like leaves on a tree, but the spirit is eternal. That's who we are. So rape really doesn't ever touch us. But what it can do is trick us to think we're tainted, dirty, wrong. And that's a really, really, really common trick that Coyote uses to hurt women. To hurt men, it uses domestic violence. So if you hurt a little boy's mother in front of him, if you beat up his mom or his sisters or his daughters or his wives or whatever, wife, I should say, unless you're polygamous. Or, anyways, if you hurt a man's mother in front of him, especially when he's in his formative years, that is a trick to make him hate himself because he feels like he failed to protect when he didn't do anything wrong. But it can mess him up for years. And Molly, if you want to mute, that would be great. Because if he hates himself, guess what? Creator's hands are tied. Creator can't help him because he said, no, I'm not worthy. So there's literally just a couple tricks in the book that Coyote be using over and over and over again. And we as a society need to learn those tricks so that we can avoid them. Or not avoid them, but see through them. And of course, there's other tricks too. But those are the main ones: war, rape of women, and harming a boy's women in his family. Just like in Star Wars, I know it's kind of silly, but when did Darth Vader switch from the light to the Sith? Was when they killed his mom, right? He lost his marbles, and you can hardly blame him. When someone hurts the same being you were put here to protect, you can lose your mind. And I think that's how a lot of wars keep going, because some group kills a woman in this group, and then that group of men basically loses their minds and will go to the ends of the earth for retribution. So what's the moral of the story is, let's love ourselves, let's love each other, let's forgive each other. That is how we keep these tricks from taking root. Okay, by healing the earth, can we also heal ourselves? Yes. In every sense. Can you tell us a little bit about your research on food? I'm going to put something here in the chat for you to check it out. Or I think you guys had access to my dissertation, but I'm also going to put this in here too, which is essentially my, oops, sorry, out loud. This is a good video of that. And maybe, I don't know, what do you think, Joe? Should we, or Jim, should we take Doreen's final question and then continue?
Yeah, let's take Doreen's question. Doreen, if you could unmute yourself on the bottom left-hand corner. We can't hear you, Doreen, so if you could just go to the little symbol.
I got it.
Great, you did it. Okay.
I changed my screen. That's why I couldn't get her. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Maybe mine's a half comment, half concern, half question. Thank you very much. Your presentation is deep when you say what is the most important thing. Let me just say, I come from working in Peru. I'm sitting in New York right now, but I live in Peru, and I've worked many years among the Aymara people. I had the blessing to visit New Mexico about 14 years ago and stood in meetings with people that you say are, the Navajo is not the right word, Diné Nation, that stood up and said, my father has cancer, my uncle has cancer, my son has cancer, my grandson has cancer, my granddaughter, etc. The question of super funds and the non-cleanup that still has happened in the New Mexico area. So when I'm surprised by your presentation, and I'm grateful for your presentation, because you're bringing persons like myself. My own background is white. My background is Cuban, Ukrainian descent, Spanish. how not to repeat the oppression that some of our ancestors engaged in, and that perhaps I still engage in. Because one of my dilemmas, and this is your question, okay? When I heard Molly, if I may say just your first name, express your concern, you know, how do we get in touch with this of the needing of healing? My concern is, as a white person, I'm still in a very privileged position. I'm not going to be picked up in the street here in New York and ask for my papers the way I look, but some others will that look differently. So, I mean, how do we give ourselves the space to look into our own histories and roots, but yet know that in some way my whiteness is still complicit in helping things happen that put people down? That's saying it mildly, okay? I worked among the Aymara, so I think a very important thing is the love and respect of earth and all that exists. I think that's a very important message, and I can't leave that aside. I was taught that by those people. I was reminded of that as a New Yorker, okay? So anyway, this dilemma I see of recouping history of a white person, or whatever color you are, your own history, okay? But especially of white that you were talking about. How do you balance all of this out given the reality of today? Who has the power? Thank
Well,
you.
here's it. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for your question, Doreen. Well, here's a spin on that you might not expect, which is for those of us with white passing bodies, because even though I am half white, I don't quite pass, but I can still do other work. For those of us with white passing bodies, as it were, maybe we were perfectly born into these bodies to do change that only we can do. In other words, this is a totally made up story, but what if there was someone who did egregious things as a white person? Maybe they were enslaving others. Maybe they were stealing land, whatever it was. And then what if they were reincarnated 5 generations later and they asked Creator, please reincarnate me. I need to go back. I need to fix some things that I did. That would be beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that. And they can be reincarnated in a white passing body and do things here that I can't do. Just like I can do things that a white passing body can't do. We all have our unique way in. Or forget about the reincarnation story. What if our great-great-great-grandpa did something terrible? Not judging him as a person or as a spirit, but his actions were, let's just say, terrible. And then we say, Creator, please incarnate me as the great-great-great-grandchildren of that person, because I need to go in and fix some things that he did. How cool would that be? That's like that's a real warrior move, a peaceful warrior, saying, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to work on some stuff. I'm going to help heal some stuff. And my mother is Native, my father is mostly white. So I came out brown and my brother came out white. But guess what? That's perfect, because I can do some things that he can't do, and he can do some things that I can't do. And we go in together and we kick butt and take names left and right. Because it doesn't matter what skin color you have. What matters is your motivation. If your motivation is to love, if your motivation is to heal, if your motivation is to care for things, then we need you exactly as you are. Because because humans are such visual creatures, love can only do certain things in one body that it can't do in another body, and vice versa. But if love is the same spirit inhabiting whatever body, then that body is an asset to the earth. And so let love inhabit you, and let love drive you, and let love move you. and you will always be doing the right thing, and you will always be the right person, and you will always be in the right place. That's the joy of it. I know there's so many more questions that we have probably than answers, but the first link I sent in the chat is my speech on Indigenous food systems, if you're interested. The second one is just a cool song I heard yesterday or 2 days ago. And I'm so honored to spend a little time with you. I know we could probably do this for a few more hours, but I really, really appreciate all of you so much. And I appreciate you, Jim, for, you know, doing all the arrangements, and your team, and Joe for getting me here. So thank you.
Thank you, Lyla. And we're so grateful and so pleased with your wonderful presentation. And you know, I was just thinking of reincarnation and trying to right the wrongs through a previous life, even going back or forward in time. It's a wonderful idea, and it reminded me of John Newton, who was a minister, who was actually the captain of a slave ship, and he came to really be horrified by what he was involved in, and he wrote the great hymn Amazing Grace because he was transformed, and he tried to mitigate, you know, what he had seen and done by being a leader in the abolitionist movement in England. Ultimately got slavery abolished in England. So I guess in one lifetime he almost moved back and forward in different roles. So I thought that was very moving. But I was wondering if we could ask Joe, because he was very passionate about looking into all our Indigenous roots, which you so beautifully touched on, to maybe conclude for this evening. So I'm just looking for Joe. Here you are, Joe.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jim. Couple of things, yeah. I would love, just if we have an extra minute after I finish, if Lyla June could just briefly maybe tell everybody the story of her dream about all her grandparents coming together. Am I loud enough here? Yeah, I'll pull this closer. The other thing is, we have 4 pillars at the foundation of SSGN based on sources from which we've tried to draw wisdom. The first one, thanks especially to Elizabetha, was Thomas Berry, who she, along with Joanne Owen, brought Thomas Berry and Brian Swim over and over to St. Thomas University. And that was really foundational for the Assisi conferences and everything. That's really big. And then secondly, and Amanda's involved in this too, and also Elizabetha was involved earlier even in the Earth Charter. And with our friend Miriam Villela now heads it up. And that's such a rich thing too. The third one is more recent, and that's Laudato Si. I like to say we could expand that all to include Al-Misan, the new powerful Islamic document as well about the earth. And the fourth one that we've always been the weakest in, deficiency of our own, but has begun to be remedied by Lyla June, is Indigenous wisdom, Indigenous traditions. And so my prayer tonight would be that Lyla June's coming with us to say her important message would just be a small first step of enabling us to drink from Lyla June's riches for a long time. And a little stream that has begun to flow could grow into a great river.
Thank you very much, Joe. So I think it's all from the bottom of our heart. Lyla, we hope you'll come and join us again to share our conversation in future.
Yes, absolutely. It was such a joy to be with you all.
Okay.
And my prayers are with you all.
And maybe even a song in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We should do that. I am on Spotify, and I am on YouTube as Lyla June, if you want to check out.
Oh, Lyla
And
June.
I'll just put this in the chat real quick. I wrote a song called Mamulad, which maybe you already showed folks. But this is a song about Welsh, Celtic, Scottish, well, just European identity in general. So I'll throw that in the chat right now too.
That would be great.
Yeah, that one, because Mamulad means motherland in Welsh. So it was sort of like an ode to all the women who had been burned and the daughters that they couldn't burn and who are still here today, and to all the men who love this. So yeah. So thank you all, and I look forward to meeting with you guys again.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so
So
much.
much.
All of you.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.